All right, so I started the recording, so we can just dive into it. So this is LIP call 9. We postponed this LIP call was originally scheduled for last week, but we pushed it back a week because it seemed like that there wasn't too much that needed to actually be discussed based on the notes from the previous LIP call, mainly because in the previous LIP call, um, there seemed to be consensus that the main focus right now was on the two gas cost uh, reduction proposals for earnings claiming on the network, so LIP 36 and 52. And we're kind of in the tail end of the work involved with those two proposals. So I think today we can talk a little bit about how those are going, but also kind of revisit some of the other proposals that we kind of put on the back burner because we were focused on those two gas cost reduction proposals for earnings claiming. So I think we can just take a look at the agenda. I have it open here in front of me. I can include it in the chat in case anyone hasn't seen it. So I dropped a link in the chat with the agenda for today, and we can just go through the list of LIP candidates, and I think the champion for each of them can lead us through kind of the relevant updates there. So the first one is LIP 36, the cumulative earnings claiming proposal, and I was the original champion of this, with Nico driving a lot of the technical implementation. So the official status of this proposal is that it is now final. It was deployed. Um, it was deployed and accepted in a poll. And just for a brief summary, the LIP 36 received 100% support in the poll, and there was 52.1% participation, which I think I'm not sure of this actually. It might have been the highest participation we've seen thus far, maybe outside of the original proposal introducing this whole state-based polling system. So I think it was nice to be able to see that over 50% of the stake on the network actually participated in accepting LIP 36. And in terms of active orchestrator participation, 17 out of the 46 active orchestrators voted in that poll, and 29 did not vote. So that proposal is now final and it's deployed on mainnet. And it was kind of the first half of the two-part gas cost reduction timeline that a blog post was published about. So now it's kind of just onto the second half, which is LIP 52. But before getting to LIP 52, does anyone on the call have any questions or wants to make any comments about LIP 36 and the aftermath there?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, it seems like, kind of seems to me like a low orchestrator participation rate. Do you happen to recall what the orchestrator participation rate was for prior proposals?
Not off the top of my head, but I can see if I can look it up real quick just because I have a page in front of me. So go to the voting page. I think we can take a look at the maybe.
It might be good to track that, or is that being tracked on the dashboard? Because I've only been looking at stake weight, but when I report things with like on Twitter and whatnot, I haven't noticed if there's a list of what orchestrators have voted or not.
Yeah, I think so. I've been going off of like there's this one-off application that Atom built that shows us which orchestrators participated, but it hasn't been incorporated into the Explore application yet. But I think that's a good piece of feedback that maybe, yeah, maybe that should find its way itself. Maybe it should find itself in the Explorer sooner rather than later. Adam, do you have any thoughts on that? Okay, maybe we can revisit this topic. Not sure if Adam heard that. But yeah, I think it could be a good idea to highlight.
Be incorporated in the Explorer. There you go.
Oh, there you go. Adam, what was that? Didn't catch all of that.
Yeah, I was just saying, yeah, agreed. It should definitely get incorporated into the Explorer sooner rather than later. Yeah, I think it's definitely insightful to see which orchestrators haven't voted yet, so people can, prod them to actually vote on an active poll.
Yeah, definitely feels like a missing feature that there is a way to get insight into it right now, but there isn't enough attention being drawn to it. Yeah, that's a good point, Gavin. And just for reference, Gavin, you asked what the participation in previous polls look like. I'm looking at, I can share a link here. I'm looking at the page for the LIP35 poll, which was the inflation change update that preceded LIP36, and the participation actually looks fairly similar. There was 15 active orchestrators that voted and 31 that did not.
Thanks for sharing that. It's good to know.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely, I think one takeaway here is that this information should be more prominent, and it could be worthwhile to consider what other things to draw attention to, given it seems like there's consistent active orchestrator participation, but it hasn't like increased relative to previous polls. And there's actually quite a few active orchestrators that did not vote. So yeah, not sure if now is the best time to kind of consider all the different ways to address that, but it does seem like something that should be addressed.
Yeah, I think it's a good starting point at the very least to have some sort of record for accountability, and then that maybe will prompt orchestrators who maybe need some sort of alerting or some sort of key management or something that will help them lower the barrier for participation.
Mm-hmm. I guess since we're on this topic, one follow-up question that I guess I had for you since you brought it up. I know in the other networks that you participate in, they might vary in terms of like the incentives associated with voting. But I'm curious from a communication standpoint and awareness standpoint, do you think that there's anything that stand out to you that could be improved here?
I think something as simple as a mailing list that orchestrators could opt into just to get an email. This is like just an executive summary of what's about to go, ideally like as a part of the process, like right before it goes to a poll, and maybe even earlier, so that people can be proactive if they want to be rather than just reactive. But yeah, something as simple as an opt-in mailing list, I think, could increase the level of engagement.
Yeah, I think, yeah, mailing list might be a good idea. I'm curious if you feel like a mailing list might be more effective than, let's say, a Discord bot, which I believe Virus and Numerous in the community is working on. I'm curious if you think a mailing list would be more effective, less effective, or do you think that they're kind of equivalents?
I think it depends on who your audience is. So I think a Discord bot might work really well or I don't know, maybe actually, I don't know. But like I know as being part of an organization that's working across multiple protocols, I think an email would be more effective for us. Discord's hard. Discord and like multiple chat channels, they're they're kind of like conversations in a hallway, like you're either there and present for them or you kind of miss them. But there may be, I don't know exactly what the Discord bot situation looks like, but yeah, having to track countless channels is really difficult, whereas I find that, for me anyway, email's a lot easier.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's really helpful feedback, and that's good to know. Yeah, maybe an opt-in email list is something in addition to a Discord bot, as opposed to them being substitutes for each other, with one being better for certain audiences than others.
Yeah, I guess especially for like even just a dedicated one for orchestrators would be great. But maybe it would be good to broaden the audience for that mailing list. But the idea could be to say, we need your attention, whether it's a vote or whether it's a change in protocol, but just something that doesn't just kind of fly under the radar in a Discord channel.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anybody else on the call have any thoughts on this topic?
I think our descriptions of what a poll entails on the voting page itself might be a little incomprehensible at times, because it's, from what I can tell, it's just the opening post of the discussion thread, which kind of reflects the spec for each issue, which might be too technical for some users. So it might be good to, and I know we integrated this with GitHub, but it might be good once we put up an LIP up for a vote to actually put a summary of what the LIP does and what it entails on top of that, like above the entire spec, so that it's comprehensible for even non-technical users. Using LIP52 as an example, yeah, we have the spec there, and yeah, we mentioned that there's a snapshot being taken, but we don't really mention what is the Merkle root for a snapshot, for example. That's something that's not in the summary for the poll, which is kind of, it seems to me to be crucial information. And one other thing that I find lacking in transparency is actually who created the poll. So it would be nice if we could have some, I don't know, Treebox integration for that, so that we at least have some more visibility into that, because users might not always be aware, and by that I mean delegators or orchestrators, that it's mostly Livepeer Inc. creating the polls, which would be trustworthy, I guess, in most cases, but they don't see who created the actual poll. So that might be interesting to add that as well. Because if, for example, Doug or you or me created a poll, that might instill a little bit more confidence in the poll itself or in the LIP than if some random anonymous person or pseudonymous person created a poll.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. My summary is, we might benefit from a more general description of what a poll contains outside of the LIP itself, whereas right now you just display the entire LIP, which we kind of acknowledge is highly technical in nature. So there might be an opportunity for a separate write-up. That might be on the poll creator to create. And then I think my second takeaway there from what you said is it might be beneficial to draw more attention to the creator of the poll, because that might actually matter to people when they look at a poll. Like, depending on who created it, they might place more or less emphasis on it. Is that about right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. And I think we could also include the first thing in like the general process of LIPs, that when you move an LIP to a proposed status, you have to add like a non-technical summary of what the LIP does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I think those are good ideas. Would you be up for, so I'm taking notes on some of these things, and I believe Adam is taking notes for the call overall. as kind of like an action item, do you think you'd be up for maybe documenting this somewhere, like maybe as like GitHub issues for the poll application so that it might be able to be incorporated there?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else have any either follow-up thoughts or suggestions pertaining to this topic around poll engagement?
Just further to what Nico said, I think that at the core, it makes sense to have everything precise and technically described. But then beyond that, I think that the predominant communication, whether that's like Twitter or blog posts, that it should be as human friendly as possible. And then if people want to know precisely what that means, then with links to the GitHub part, but like extra attention on what it means in really human-friendly terms, like the implications and who the proposal will affect and likely affect and how.
Yeah, that makes sense. Making sure that if this proposal affects this person, if this person reads it, that's like the first thing that stands out to them, as opposed to they don't realize until they get to the end of reading the proposal.
One last question I have. Do we think recent gas prices on Ethereum affected poll participation or not?
Personally, I haven't done an in-depth analysis of this. I suspect not, given kind of just looking really quickly at like the number of active orchestrators that participated. Perhaps it might have impacted delegators. Would have to look at the data for that. My current hunch is that it didn't have a big impact on it, especially because I think the time at which the LIP36 poll ran, relatively speaking, was in a lower gas price period. Maybe the situation might have been different if we were still in like 400 GWay days, which fingers crossed we won't reach soon again. But yeah, my hunch is no, but yeah, there might be data out there that indicates otherwise.
Right. Let me ask the question differently. Do we think we would reach a higher participation rate if polling was done off-chain through signatures, for example, as many other protocols currently do? Is the fact that you have to submit a transaction regardless of the gas price, is that a barrier to vote or not?
I suspect that it is a barrier.
Right, yeah, I don't have the answer either, and not really have an opinion on the matter. I was just an open-ended question to maybe consider or think about.
Yeah, I think it's there's probably a deeper discussion to be had there, but I suspect that it is a barrier, and I think that's likely why, as you alluded to, a lot of projects, some projects at least, kind of veer into like the off-chain based voting procedure. And I think an interesting trend in the industry right now, at least within the DeFi space, is there's been some great work done by like the Aragon team to kind of create on-chain binding voting systems that involve votes that are casted off-chain. So I think there's some interesting developments there that, yeah, might be interesting to incorporate into our system if we suspect that the barrier is a really big problem in the short term. But yeah, I do suspect that it's a barrier. It's just a question of when should that barrier be addressed.
Okay, yeah, that kind of answers my question. So yeah, thanks.
Cool. In the interest of time, I think this was a good discussion about poll engagement that emerged out of the LIP36 poll discussion. And I think we have a good few takeaways that we already talked about. Let's move on to the next LIP candidate, which there might be some overlap in terms of the things that we might want to talk about, and that is LIP 52, the earnings snapshot proposal. This was the second half of the gas cost reduction effort, and Doug was the champion of this with Nico as the co-champion. Doug is currently out. So Nico, would you like to give a quick update on where we're at with this proposal and anything else that you might want to kind of make the group aware of?
Yes, so when LIP 36 was deployed, there were some actions taken that do relate to LIP 52 as well. One being that the LIP upgrade round, which is the round number at which an LIP gets deployed, it's stored on the rounds manager, and it was set for LIP 52 as it kind of reflects the round at which the snapshot for the earnings was taken. So that was set to the LIP 36 deployment round -1. There are some technical reasons for that. If you want to get more details on that, I suggest you read the LIP 52 spec, it's in there. The other thing that happened right when LIP 36 was deployed and we knew what the deployment round would be for LIP 36 is that a snapshot was actually taken. There was a new contract deployed that kind of stores the Merkle root for these snapshots. And that contract is also linked to the controller. So the snapshot Merkle root is entirely queryable on chain. The other thing that we did after we created the snapshot for the earnings was release a CLI tool that allows users to not only query what their earnings would be for that snapshot round, but also verify those earnings against the Merkle root that was stored on chain. So this might not be very clear from like what the CLI tool does from a user perspective, because it just queries stuff on chain and then shows you that a verification has happened. And it, from what I gathered from some feedback, it was not entirely clear how a user could independently verify that its earnings were part of a snapshot. But yeah, the question, the thing was that the CLI tool kind of does that automatically, and you can, or the community as a whole can verify that as code because the entire tool is open source. If you wish to verify things manually, you can look up your address in the tree and check that it's there. That's also possible, but the CLI tool should automate that a lot for you. So that's what's happened so far with LIP 52. We of course finished the implementation, and we're looking to deploy it as soon as the poll ends, which ends in 2 days. So that's on a Friday. So I believe we are planning to implement LIP 52 on the next Monday. The one other thing that we're currently finishing up before the deployment is the integration into the Explorer. So that would entail that, one, there is no longer a notion of maximum claim rounds. And secondly, when a user performs a staking action, such as bonding or unbonding or withdraws fees, after LIP 52 is deployed, it will automatically claim its earnings for the snapshot and up until the current round. So it will do both the snapshot claiming and the auto claim earnings thing that happens when you perform such an action. So when a user undertakes action through the Explorer, it should have up-to-date claimed earnings automatically without requiring any further action. For orchestrators itself that don't really use the Explorer to claim their earnings or don't have exported keys outside of their bare metal deployment, you can also claim your earnings through the CLI tool once LIP 52 is deployed. So that's currently where we're at, and I hope we get the vote to pass. We need one roughly 1% more to reach quorum, and then we can deploy it on Monday. So yeah, that's kind of an update there.
Great. Yeah, and I think the total participation in this LIP52 poll right now is at 33.135%. So 0.2% off of achieving quorum, and the total support is at 99.982% right now. And we have 13 active orchestrators that have voted thus far. Nico, you mentioned that there was some confusion around, verifying the snapshot for some people. I know we're pretty late in the game at this point with 2 days left in the poll, but are there any action items from that feedback, or do you think it was really just explaining to those people that were confused and there really isn't as much utility in kind of doing anything extra at this point?
Right. So one thing I did was I added some more explanations to the README doc. I added like what the usage commands would be, even though that's like vaguely mentioned at the top. The one other source of confusion was that yes, it queries the earnings, and yes, I can verify those earnings on Etherscan, like the forum post mentioned, but those seem to be just two different routes of querying the same data. And it wasn't clear to some users for like, oh, is this actually my data for up until the snapshot round? So that's something that wasn't easily verifiable, I guess. Although one could say you could alter the snapshot round environment variable and check that produces a different output. The other potential solution there would have been for the verification command to, instead of only taking the user address and then fetch the earnings on chain, to have that also be the user input. But the trade-off there was that that could lead to user input error, and that might lead to wrongful conclusions drawn by the user. So we opted to just query it on chain and do the verification that way. So I don't think there's any further additional steps, but we can definitely take some things away from the CLI tool in terms of user flow in case we ever need to do it again.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Thanks for providing some color there. Anybody have any comments, reactions, or questions regarding Nico's update? One question that I have is, Nico, you mentioned that there's a few things that are changing in the Explorer as a part of the LIP52 update. And those things that change also kind of affect user expectations with how they use the Explorer moving forward. One clear example is the removal of this max number of rounds that you can claim. I think another example is the removal of the manual earnings claiming action in its entirety. Yeah, do people think that before Monday or on Monday, if LIP52 is deployed and if it's accepted, accompanying either forum post or blog post that kind of updates user expectations with regard to the changes in Explorer could be worthwhile?
Yeah, I think that might be useful. I'm not sure what would be the best option here, a forum post or a blog post, but that could definitely help to set user expectations. And I also think we should keep this as non-technical as possible, probably.
Yeah, definitely. Adam, I know that you've published information about the Explorer in the past, such as like new features for users to expect. Do you happen to have an initial instinct as to what might be the best route here? A blog post that's non-technical, that updates user expectations post LIP52, or a forum post?
Yeah, I think I would lean towards a blog post. Alternatively, we also have that changelog page in the Explorer. So we usually, when I create an update on the Explorer, I accompany it with a changelog update in the What's New section. So we could also link users there for an update. We could also potentially even like greet users with a modal on the Explorer that they can dismiss, that like just explains the update, and that they no longer have to claim like that's a thing of the past. I think those are all options. But yeah, I think at the very least, like yeah, a simple blog post that we can link users to.
Quick question. I kind of like the modal ID, but is there a way that we can make it general in so that whenever there's a new item in What's New, that we kind of display a modal of What's New, but then we don't display it again after the user has sort of read it or dismissed it. And that can be either by clicking it away or by clicking like a button, I've read this. Is there like an easy way for us to do that?
Yeah, actually, that's a good idea. Yeah, we could.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we could display the changelog in the actual modal, and then just use local storage to record whether a user dismissed it, the modal.
Yeah, that sounds good to me, because I haven't really read the What's New page ever, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good. Nico and or Adam, do you think this is something that you guys will be able to take on before Monday?
Yeah. Yeah, I could take that on. Yeah. Perhaps it can even be like a banner at the top of the page, but yeah, however it manifests itself in the UI, I think, yeah, a dismissible alert would definitely, I think, avoid a lot of confusion.
Great. Sounds good. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions for LIP52? Cool. If not, then I think we can move on to the next candidate, which LIP candidate, which is the first of two candidates that we haven't really been talking about recently because of the focus on the gas cost reduction proposals. So the first of these two is LIP56. As a reminder, so I was the original champion of this, and as a reminder of what this proposal is focused on is it's focused on gas cost reductions, but for orchestrators. So attempting to reduce the gas cost burden of calling reward, which is a daily burden right now. So the basic gist of the proposal is to not reduce the gas costs per reward call, so per reward transaction, but reduce the frequency at which an orchestrator needs to submit the reward transaction, the call reward. And that's at a high level, that is what the proposal suggests. There is an initial recommendation from a design and implementation standpoint for how to achieve that. But from initial feedback, there were some kind of gaps there that were highlighted. And the last time that we talked about this LIP in this call, one suggestion I made was around perhaps separating out the inflation management logic that currently lives in the Minter contract from the Minter contract itself. So right now, the Minter contract serves two roles. It is the bank. It holds staked LPT as well as deposited Ether, but it also manages everything pertaining to token minting and the inflation schedule. So the suggestion I had was if we separate out that responsibility from the Minter, there are some flexibility benefits, which is not so much specific to LIP 56, but generally speaking, if there needs to be updates to how the inflation schedule works or how tokens are minted, those types of updates can be executed in a more isolated form and they can be easier to do. So if we think back to LIP 35, one of the headaches from that inflation change proposal was that we needed to deploy an entirely new Minter. So if we created this separation, then that might make that process a little easier. And then getting to why this is relevant to LIP 56 is that if that separation is made, then you might be able to use the inflation management specific logic in a contract and update it so that, for example, orchestrators would only mint tokens every 7 days as opposed to mint tokens every day. So if you tried minting tokens on a day that was not the quote unquote reward round, then no tokens would be minted. But if you tried calling reward on a day which is the reward round, then the inflation management component would say, yeah, you can mint tokens this round, and the amount of tokens that are minted are for the previous 7 days, as an example. So I think that's where we kind of left off for this LIP with that suggestion on the previous LIP call, but unfortunately, there has not been much progress there since then. So before getting to the topic that I wanted to talk about, I'll pause there. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts on kind of where we currently stand with this LIP?
I'll just add that I think this is probably at current gas prices the least pressing one of the 3 gas cost reduction LIPs we had, because I think as long as the gas price is under 100 GWay, the reward costs for most orchestrators I think are actually fairly manageable, but it would still be a good thing to reduce the frequency and thus reduce the cost of calling rewards, or at least getting the inflationary LPT.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the situation has been a little bit better in the past couple of weeks relative to some of the crazier gas prices that we saw maybe like last month or a month and a half ago. Cool. And then I think we can move on to the topic that I wanted to talk about, or something that I want to highlight is kind of a technical responsibility update. So I was the original champion of this proposal, but I, at least this week and probably next week, I don't think I'll be able to make substantial progress on updating the design here past the kind of suggestion I made in the previous LIP call. And offline, separate from this call, I talked to Nico a little bit about potentially having a technical responsibility handoff. So Nico, do you think you're still on board with that and up for kind of spearheading this proposal going forward? or some variant of it?
Yes, definitely.
Cool. So I think moving forward in the next LIP call, I think Nico can probably give updates on where this proposal is at, just so everyone's on the same page about like who's spearheading which proposal. That was kind of about it for LIP 56, unless Nico, you had anything that you wanted to bring up as well pertaining to this proposal.
Not anything conclusive at the moment. So let's talk about it in 2 weeks, I guess.
Okay, sounds good. Cool. Then I think we can move on to the last LIP candidate here, which is actually a LIP, an older LIP that we kind of put on the shelf because we wanted to focus on the gas cost reductions for earnings claiming. And this is LIP 25, the extensible governance contract, which Nico had championed and had spearheaded everything. So I think the main thing that I thought we could highlight here is the timeline moving forward for this proposal, given that LIP 36 has been deployed, LIP 52, we're kind of closing in on the end of the poll there. So I thought it'd be good to kind of revisit how we're thinking about the timeline for this proposal. So Nico, do you want to kind of take us through where you think this proposal is at today?
Yeah, so I think when we left off last time discussing this, we've had the security review done. I also believe we've had addressed the recommendations in that security review. I followed up on those last week because there were some tests that were not passing due to like a minor thing that's been fixed. So we currently require one last follow-up review to review the recommendations that were made and the implementation of those. After that, it's a matter of getting this LIP deployed. So that would mean moving LIP 25 to the proposed status, deploying and testing the deployment to Rinkeby, creating a poll, and then, of course, once the poll finishes, deploying it to mainnet. Since we have LIP 52 coming up on Monday, I was thinking that we could start this process either the week thereafter or somewhere later next week. And that would put us at probably a deployment date of somewhere around the end of October. The reason why this LIP might be reasonably important to push forward, I guess, which is also important to add, is that for LIP 36, the security review highlighted the fact that we didn't really have an auditable upgrade script for that LIP. And that would also be true for other more complex upgrades to the protocol. And LIP 25 allows this to happen atomically and allows us to actually have an auditable and open source, perhaps, script that can be used to upgrade the contract. So that's where this LIP is at, and that's what I was thinking in terms of timeline to get this deployed before the end of October and start a poll somewhere around the middle of October.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that update. So you're thinking that regardless of where we are with LIP 56, after LIP 52 poll ends, it could be reasonable, as long as we complete the necessary due diligence steps, that we can move forward with creating a poll for LIP 25. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Because I think LIP 56 would likely take place, or at least the deployment for it would take place after this anyway, because that implementation and even the full technical spec still has to be made. So there will be a gap for reviewing that spec and reviewing the implementation and creating a poll for that, where we actually have an opportunity to deploy this. Because I currently consider it low-hanging fruit because most of the steps are finished from an engineering perspective.
That makes sense. Something that I'd be curious to hear, either from you, Nico, or anyone else in the group, is um, one of the reasons why this proposal was shelved temporarily was because the thought was that with high gas prices on Ethereum, it made sense to really focus on LIP 36 and 52 because there is a very clear connection for a user or a poll voter with why they would want to participate in this poll. And I think, as you mentioned, there's important technical reasons why the LIP25 is an important component, but it might not be, there isn't as a direct relationship between like the poll voter and the benefit that the proposal creates. So I wonder if that's something that we should be concerned about as we prepare for a poll, and if we are concerned about it, whether some of the strategies that we highlighted earlier in the call might help here, especially considering that this is a poll that, if it flies under the radar, it might not reach quorum. It's much more likely that it won't reach quorum relative to like something like LIP 36 or LIP 52. So I'm curious if anyone on the call has thoughts on that.
I think, and I don't want to hijack this discussion, but I think the story around his LIP is far more important than the technical details. So we've had this roadmap of the road to decentralization for Livepeer, and this very much is a next step on that roadmap to sort of, over time, hand off responsibility of managing protocol upgrades and parameter updates to a binding voting system rather than the Livepeer Inc. multisig, and this is like an intermediary step, and I think we very much need to frame the story for that, around that fact.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Nico. I actually think there is a way to package this story so that it's actually easier for participants in the Livepeer ecosystem to understand, because token holders tend to be more like Web3 aware, and they might not understand the underlying token mechanics as much, even with the earnings and claim and rewards. But when it comes to like decentralized governance and giving up the keys, like people tend to, even connect more with that.
Yeah, those are all really good points. Do you think that something like the suggestion that you made earlier, Nico, around having a separate like poll description, it would be like a useful tool here? Because then it would allow, it might not be the only thing that we do, for example, to tell the story, but it might be a useful tool in highlighting why this poll is important outside of like the technical details of the spec, which is what by default would be shown in the Explorer right now. Do you think that would help?
Yes, definitely. I think that would help tremendously, as well as use that same story to communicate about the LIP, and we can test out a little bit of the thesis of what it means to have more of a story summary for an LIP and a poll, rather than just a technical spec and how that affects participation.
When we, for the practices for the Cosmos Hub that we've been kind of pushing for, is when somebody launches a proposal that they have just a quick, like a summary of the most important details at the front, like front load it in simplest possible terms without losing meaning. And then have a link to, like, we use IPFS to have like the full in-depth proposal. But the idea is that the first stuff, the first bit of information that anybody sees, we assume that nobody's going to read it beyond that. So try to get the most, like, someone non-technical should be able to decide after reading 2 or 3 sentences whether or not they're prepared to vote for this and how they're prepared to vote, assuming they read nothing else afterwards.
Yeah, that's really helpful insight. So maybe a takeaway here is that specifically for LIP 25, if there is a desire to create a poll soon after LIP 52's poll ends, a prerequisite prior to getting to that point is having some form of briefs, like having this brief summary feature as a part of the poll. And then maybe there's additional things that can be done for a storytelling point of view from there, but have that be the kind of necessary baseline before a poll is created. How does that sound?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of it in terms of restrictions in the Explorer application for voting. The way I remember it's set up is that it's linked to GitHub, and you can select a GitHub discussion issue from what I remember, either that or the Markdown doc. Like, I'm not sure. So my suggestion would just be to add it like on top of everything there. Just put it on top, above like what's currently the first bullet point, I think, abstraction. Just have like a brief summary when it's moved to proposed status that sits on top of the entire discussion post or Markdown document, whichever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think whether it's that or if there is a reasonably simple way to achieve something like what Gavin described that the Cosmo Hub uses, where there's a brief summary and it links out to the actual proposal. Yeah, maybe that's something that the individuals actually implementing it can decide on. But it sounds like the high level goal is to make sure that you can really draw attention to like this summary section that tells the story and have that be like the main focus with the ability to go to the actual technical proposal if you want to, but kind of as Gavin said, assume that they never read the technical proposal or might not get there. Does that sound like a kind of reasonable goal? And then we can work out the details from there, depending on who's working on it.
So it sounds like a pretty good summary.
Cool. So yeah, maybe Adam, Nico, maybe we can chat about this offline and then kind of work on, like, think about what the best approach here is. But either way, I think something here feels like a prerequisite for the LIP 25 poll.
Yep, sounds good.
Cool. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions for LIP 25? Cool. If not, we have a few minutes left over. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to bring up for a short open discussion period, highlighting anything that they want to be added to the agenda for the next call, or anything else that we didn't cover yet? All right. If not, then I think we can wrap up today's LIP call here then. The recording will be posted on YouTube, and we'll upload the notes to the community governance repo in the next few days. And then we'll schedule the next LIP call, which should tentatively be 2 weeks from today. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
guys.
Great chat. Take care, guys.
Bye.